Stargate, and I'm your host, Janet Care Lessin, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. You're listening to Revolution Radio, Studio B. Our producer today is Thomas Becker, the world-famous mad painter, and our guest is Walter Rucker, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Walter, and then I'm going to bring on Dr. Sasha Lessin, and then I'll bring on Walter. So Walter is a CE5 experiencer, an expert on mediumship of all types with an emphasis on physical mediumship. He's a teacher of out-of-body experiences. He is the author of hundreds of articles on subjects of consciousness, spirit communication, and extraterrestrial interaction. And I have a full bio on Walter on aquarianradio.com. And we're going to be talking about UFOs, out-of-body experiences, and all kinds of wonderful subjects. And Walter, you don't have to have your video on for this show.
Okay.
We'll do a video at another time, but right now this show is just audio. So Dr. Lessin, hi.
Aloha. Yes, we're looking forward to listening to how you got onto the path and what your path has been like.
Welcome to our show, Walter. I'm looking forward to it.
Janet and Sasha, thank you very much. It's my honor and it's my pleasure.
Well, thank you for coming. We're really fortunate that we found you. I forget how we found each other, but that's okay. So, so you have found a fascinating correlation between the communication from the physically dead and the off-planet-based ET worlds where they agree and disagree. Can you tell us more about your path and how you got into this field? And it seems like you had a regular life before you got into ET stuff. Commercial real estate development, IT mainframe, IBM Unisys management and sales, hardware and software, to Fortune 100 companies, et cetera, et cetera. So what got you from a mainstream regular type job and life into metaphysics and extraterrestrials and
the works?
What happened?
Well, it's you were right. I was a corporate being. I was raising a family. I was living in the South of the United States, and living a pretty typical life of going to baseball games and hanging out with my kids and my wife and friends, family, and traveling a bit and all that kind of stuff. And once my kids got to the adult age and they no longer needed me, it left kind of a void. And I've always been academically inclined. I can prove that by showing you my pitiful grades in college and high school. But the gist of it is that I've always enjoyed reading and looking and wondering, and I finally got an opportunity to spend a little time thinking about metaphysical things. I don't even think I knew them as metaphysical things back then, but what are we here for? How do we navigate this reality? What's the best way to get the best experience out of what I'm doing here, et cetera, those kinds of things. And, you just start picking up pieces of the puzzle from various readings. And I'll tell you, one of the first books or sets of books, I should say, that I read were about the creation of the Homo erectus and the Anunnaki influence in the genetic manipulation.
Was that Sitchin or somebody else that you were reading?
It was Sitchin. I was reading some of your work. I was reading work from the Paul Hamden and William Truyonnet works called the Zeta compilations. Bits and pieces of things that I could pick up from all types of extraterrestrial communication. And I suppose that if I had to lay the majority of my education at the feet of any particular extraterrestrial communicator, would be Bashar. He's talked for 35 years about our beginnings how we adapted, evolved, how we got to where we are now, where we're going. And all of that material seemed to gel together. It wasn't a perfect fit. It wasn't a tongue and groove fit between what, say, Bashar had to say and what you guys had to say and what Sitchin had to say. But there was enough duplication and enough identity between the three that it began to make just logical sense. And the further you get into it, as you guys certainly know better than I do, the more sensical and more logical you can appreciate the history of the genetic manipulation of our Homo sapien species and the path that we've taken to get to where we are today is on the cusp, I believe, of changing once more into an entirely different species called Homo galacticus. I think that's where we're headed. That's how I got to kind of where I am today. There was a lot of other things that were involved in that, experiences that were involved. One of them happened to be that I had a very good experience in reading and watching the Harry Potter series. And there was a number of metaphysical questions that are brought up in that series. You know, it's funny. Most people you say Harry Potter and they think of kids' books, but J.K. Rowling was a master at writing for all ages. And she had enough metaphysical information, suggestions, her thoughts in the Potter books that I found it fascinating as an adult to read them, and also as a
what were some of the concepts that she was interjecting in her? Because I admit I haven't read them. I've only seen a couple of the movies. I really tuned into what she was talking about, these soul-sucking ring waves. They kind of remind me of J.R.R. Tolkien's, whatever they called. They kind of diminish and they take your soul. Because I've actually encountered that type of being in my childhood as part of my extraterrestrial experiences. But what did she put into her information that you think is accurate? What are some of the main points?
Well, I think the main thrust of what she was trying to get across in her books was that we are a product of our past, and we also are a product of our future. And Harry Potter was as much a product of his past, his parents being killed when he was very young, his adoption, etc. And he's a product of his future self and where he will end up being. And in the very last of the septology of Harry Potter, they have a very short futuristic version where he grows up and gets married and starts on the same process that I looked like I was on when I got married and had my kids. And that is, it's time to go do this. But back in the back of your head, there's always this nagging feeling that there's other things you need to look at and there's other things you need to pay attention to. Just going to have to find the right time to do that. And I think that J.K. did an excellent job of being able to put forward her ideas of what she considered to be metaphysical, which, by the way, is what she basically called magic, whether it be the magic out of Harry Potter or the like. But that's what she really, if you have seen any of her interviews, she very much alludes to the fact that what she considered magic is really just an extension of consciousness, an extension of physical reality as we know it, and that it has a religious, or is in a better term, I think, a metaphysical bent to it. So, but that was what started me on my path. And you mentioned, how did we get to know each other, Janet? I put out a series of articles, thought pieces, and I write on all kinds of different things, whatever. I wake up in the morning and it just got kind of stuck in my head. And I think I stole your email address someplace and sent you a copy of those. And you apparently saw something that you liked in them. And
yes, that you just reminded me. Yes, we did. There were articles. So I said, that's fascinating. So that's why I invited you on. Thanks for refreshing my memory. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's not the only thing that I do out there. I don't have a website. I do a bunch of these interviews, getting to do a lot more, and I'm really thoroughly enjoying that because, you know, that an interview will set you in the moment and keep you there. That's always a good place to be. So there's a very enjoyable, and I've met some really nice people out there, and I actually started taking interviews more on the ufology side. And it was funny, I had a friend of mine write to Grant Cameron, Grant being one of the more famous UFO researchers and whatnot. And Grant's going on in fact, I kid with him. I said, Grant, you're about where I was 10 years ago. Have fun. He's going on this metaphysical journey himself where it's no longer just important to him to be able to talk about things like, you know, the color of a spacecraft or how many ears does this particular extraterrestrial have. He gets away from the nuts and bolts, and he has started to look at the consciousness aspects, much like Jacques Vallée did, much like Terence McKenna did. Looked at the consciousness aspects of the extraterrestrial interaction and of course the crafts themselves. And we found each other through his interest in trying to find out something about physical mediumship. Are you guys familiar with what physical mediumship is?
Do tell us. I'm not sure what you mean by it, but go ahead.
Sure. I know that Bashar said that he certainly entertains the possibility that he's accessing not another consciousness, but an aspect, a subpersonality of his own. He says that's equally possible.
Oh, I agree. And you know, when in an all is one concept, what really difference does it make? It's the message that counts.
Right.
And his messages, you know, they're in a lot of ways they're unparalleled. But you lost me here just for a second. Physical mediumship.
Physical mediumship, yes.
Yeah, physical mediumship. Well, let's look at it as a table or a comparison. We all know what a psychic is. Somebody who just picks up information from the information field about current activities or people that happen to be around them and the like. We know what a mental medium is. This is an individual who has a distinct ability to connect with discarnates, the spirit world, those who have died, and in particular linking that connection up with an incarnate, a person who is alive, that's family or friend or has a connection to spirit. So your mental medium does that bridging. Your psychic mediums, they pull information from the information field and give it out to you in forms of intuition and images that they get. Physical mediumship is almost another activity unto itself because it does not involve any of the things that you would normally consider psychism, mental mediumship. Physical mediumship is about the phenomenology. It is about direct spirit communication. It is typically done in a darkened seance room, 10, 20, 30 sitters. There are only 4, maybe 5 true physical mediums in the world today, ones that travel and can be seen. And all of those have their own methodology of how they do and perform and operate the seance structure. But in effect, what we're trying to do in the seance with a physical medium is to put him in a trance, or he puts himself in a trance. And in the trance state, he is able to act as a bridge for spirits to communicate and for the spirit world to manipulate our environment. So in the typical physical mediumship seance, you'll see a black cabinet, some type of fabric hung off a shower curtain ring, or perhaps even a 3-sided box. You'll have a chair in there the medium will sit in. There will be some type of control of the physical medium. That is, he is either bound and gagged, or he is held in position by sitters to his left and right. And when he settles into trance, this is the signal for the spirit control to take over. Usually a single spirit is responsible for emceeing or running the seance. And that spirit also brings in other spirits who have an interest in communicating. Typically, none of the sitters have a relationship with the spirits that come through. This is a large difference between physical mediumship and mental mediumship. So it's not untypical that you will have spirits of Winston Churchill, the spirits of parapsychologists, the spirits of musicians, John Lennon, for instance. And they will come through and they will have messages to give about their life on the other side, or what they often refer to as the other side of the veil. They have messages of information to give, how we should address our physical reality, things that we might be needing to look out for, synchronistic things in our life. But this is almost always done at the very best, red light, a very low red light, or in total darkness. So you have a completely different...
Is there a reason that it has to be dark? It doesn't work unless it's dark?
Yeah, the primary reason for a dark seance room and darkened conditions is that all of the physical mediums do produce a living organism, a living flow of energy that can be seen, handled, and touched in the right circumstances. And it's called ectoplasm. And ectoplasm is highly, highly photophobic. We have historical accounts of people doing things such as, very innocently, lighting a lighter in a darkened seance room to help somebody move from chair to chair, for instance, and have an ectoplasm retract back into the medium violently and with damage to the medium's physical body. So the idea of a darkened seance room is not just for the fun of it, and it's not just for the fact that ectoplasm doesn't like it. There's a real danger to the physical medium who is producing this ectoplasm. It's flowing out of his orifices, and consequently, we are very, very tight in the security of who comes and goes inside the physical mediumship seance room, what materials you're allowed to bring in, what clothing you're allowed to wear, what chairs you're allowed to sit in. So it's a very highly structured spiritual environment. And as you can see, it's quite a bit different than having someone stand on a platform and tell you that Aunt May's coming through and wants to talk to you.
It's interesting. There's an organization in Oahu, in Hawaii, called the Aquarian Foundation, and they have on their walls all these pictures of their mediums that were doing the ectoplasm. It looks like their pictures are from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, something. You know, they're old, they're black and white and everything. And I used to go there when I lived on Oahu, so I'm getting more of what they were probably doing. Nobody that was there currently was able to do that. They were still gathered around the information that came forth previously. But I've listened to some tapings of people that were channeling people that had been alive, right? And there were some famous people that they channeled, and then you could go listen to like a YouTube of the real person, and they sounded like that person.
Yeah, what they do is, depending upon the spirit's approach, the spirit can use the voice apparatus of the physical medium, his lips, his tongue, his lungs, his larynx, and speak in what we would call a direct voice, so that it comes through, even though it sounds exactly or very close to the individual itself, it's actually coming through the physical medium's own ability to speak. And yes, he does. Winston Churchill sounds like Winston Churchill.
Right.
There is also another approach. It's called independent direct voice. Leslie Flint, who is probably the most tested and is certainly one of my most favorite physical mediums, died in 1991. But Leslie produced an ectoplasmic voice box that would actually sit near his shoulder and would exude from his neck. And this voice box actually delivered the spirit's voices and messages. And again, with the full intonation and the clarity that you would expect of spirits that, especially celebrity spirits, who we have a lot of prior information on what they sounded like and what they looked like. Right. So there's different ways of going about producing the voices. The physical phenomena that happens, and this is probably the most entertaining part of the physical mediumship seance. The physical phenomena is anywhere from cardboard trumpets flying about the room with no direct force being applied on them, levitation of other items, the levitation of the medium himself tied to a chair, the rearrangement of clothing, the unleashing of spirit animals that run across your lap and wind around your legs, cats and dogs and snakes and all of the above. So there is a part of the phenomenon piece which is spirit controlled. And I was just having this very conversation with Kai Mugi. And Kai, and last name is spelled Muegge, first name is Kai. And we were talking about this very thing. How does spirit move a trumpet through the air? How does spirit levitate a medium? How does spirit pick up a set of Tibetan bells and ring them? How do they do these physical acts? And the answer is we just really don't know. It seems to be a combination of a force field of spirits controlled within the seance circle. There could be ectoplasmic rods, something like appendages, maybe something like incompletely formed hands that could come out and pick up a trumpet and move it around. There are the etheric questions of how spirit manipulates just the etheric body of the phenomenon objects in order to make them
do different witnesses see different things, or do they all see the same manifestations?
It's both, and I'll tell you why. The physical limitations of the circle sometimes put you at a distance from a phenomenal happening. I'll give you an example. David Thompson, one of the 4 physical mediums who's traveling. David sits 30, 35, maybe up to 40 people in the horseshoe. If you're at the back of that horseshoe and phenomena is happening at the cabinet, which is at the front of the horseshoe, at the open end of the horseshoe, there's a chance you may not be able to see something that someone is sitting directly next to the cabinet or much closer to the phenomena itself. But the idea and the intent is that everybody gets to see it. Now, I can also tell you that I have sat... Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
I just wanted to interject real quick here. So are you in a group that's currently doing this, and what part of the world are you in?
Yeah, I'm in Southwest Florida, United States. Yes.
Okay.
We have a very... Yes, ma'am. We have a very active physical mediumship group here in Southwest Florida, primarily in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm across the island, the peninsula of Florida from Fort Lauderdale. But we have been bringing in physical mediums for, I guess, about 10 years now. And it's probably one of the most active places on the U.S. continent when it comes to the demonstration of physical mediums and the numbers and qualities and varieties of physical mediums that we bring in. Anyone who will travel has been to see us, and so fortunately we've had multiple experiences with all of the physical mediums that are internationally traveling, and that will probably continue as well.
I'd like you to send me a copy of the list of the people. But Sasha's
I just wonder if you let yourself function as a physical medium. Do you ever do that?
No, No, but I have been told that if I wanted to, what they call sit the work, which is to begin to sit in the cabinet and to have a small audience of people, sitters around me, that it was something that I have a past life in doing and a past life in developing. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I have absolutely no interest in being a physical medium. This is a rough business. These guys, so, they're putting out ectoplasm through their noses. They're putting out gem apports, out their eyeballs. After the mediumship session is over, they're just wasted because of all the energy that they have to control, manipulate. So it's I'm 67, 68 years of age. It's not something I plan on doing anytime soon. So that's one marathon that I'm not running.
When I moved to Oahu in 1993, I found a group called Your Spiritual Center, and they were doing this. Arthur Pacheco would bring forth Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and then some Native American, and he would physically, his whole face would shift and change. And he's now deceased, so he's left us. But one of the things they did was table tipping. And so I've been a part of these circles where the table will lift up on one leg. Usually you get a card table, but they said you could use any size table. And they invited people to bring in their own tables. And I was in private groups and the large group, which had about maybe 50 people in like a church type scenario. And that was fascinating, and I was part of it, like putting the finger on the table. And then he would ask questions. It would go up once for yes and two for no. And one time we were all laughing because the table would actually kind of laugh. We would all start laughing. The table would go up and then down and laughing. One time they were laughing so hard they disconnected from the table when I was the only one with my finger on the table, and it was going up and down. But I tested and I took my finger off the table and it stopped, and then I put my finger back on the table and it went back and did it again. So this is people don't believe this. They go, "Oh, you're making that up." And I go, "No, I was really there. This table was lifting up in the air." And so I thought this was lost, and because people used to do this back in the 30s and 40s. So you have that's fascinating. You're still doing it.
Jan, with this table business, was it just entertainment, or were you getting some kind of substantive messages?
No, we were communicating with people on the other side, and we were asking questions. And sometimes they wouldn't give us exactly who they were, and sometimes it was like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I guess he was in these type of groups when he was alive, right? That goes back to that generation.
Yeah, he matter of fact, he put his whole career and his reputation on the line by doing extensive studies of mediumship and coming to the conclusion that physical mediumship, mental mediumship as well, were very real things. He made a few blunders that cost him, but all in all, yes, he was, and that's why he is a typical celebrity spirit who shows up in mediumship. By the way, you mentioned the Aquarian Society, Janet.
Yes.
Yeah, let me tell you what I think what you saw was the last well-known physical medium that came from the United States. I'm checking my history as I say this, was Keith Milton Reinhardt. And Keith Milton Reinhardt was a fabulous physical medium. He was an outlandish character. And he died at a fairly early age for physical mediums. They have a tendency to live quite a long time, which is, I suppose, one of the reasons a lot of them want to be physical mediums. But the Aquarian Society was named after him. And I don't know I don't know what photos you saw, but I want to say Reinhardt was in the 70s and 80s. I want to say 1970s, 1980s. Could have been even a little later than that.
Yes.
Yeah. You probably saw all kinds of historical photos, and anybody that can Google physical mediumship
and the artifacts. They had different things that came forth, like you said, manifesting it. Now and I could be wrong, but I have a friend that's still on Oahu. They are still in existence, and they meet at the Hilton Hawaiian Village, I think. Yeah, and anybody can go there, and they've been given a lifetime or forever lease for this space, and so anybody who wants to check this out, go to Oahu, Hilton Hawaiian Village, and let me know if it's still there. But I talked to Mario, and he said it's still there. So this is fascinating. Okay, so you have this group in Florida, and how often do you meet, and how do you get your mediums? Are they like traveling around the United States or around the planet? How do you get them?
Yeah, the traveling physical mediums, and again, there's only a handful of them, and travel internationally, and they come to the United States. And what we try to do is we try to combine trips for them. So if a physical medium is coming into the United States, we'll try to help arrange other places for him to come, because they're coming from Germany, they're coming from the UK, they're coming as far away as Australia. As a consequently, when you go hump over the waters to demonstrate your physical mediumship, there's got to be two things in place. There's got to be a place to do it and some kind of way to compensate the medium for its expenses and the like. So we try to round up as many places as we can to bring the physical mediums in. Lilydale, which is the home of spiritualism up in New York, is a place. There's a spiritualist church in the Las Vegas area that does this. We have a second seance site in Sarasota, Florida, affiliated with a church up there. And so, yes, it's a combination of making sure that we have facilities available, getting these people in, getting them properly compensated and taken care of, because they'll come in for 4 or 5 days, a Thursday through a Monday, say, and demonstrate physical mediumship at least 3 of 4 days, 4 out of 5 days, take a day break. As I said, this is a physically taxing thing for these guys. But you happen to mention
Do you have any YouTubes? Do you have any YouTubes when I run the Facebook announcements of your talk? Is there any YouTubes that you would recommend that I run with it as a demo?
Yeah, sure. Now I'll shoot you the links on those, because it's in darkened. Yes, sir. Because it's in darkened conditions. We don't have clear, crisp, fully well lit video, but what we do have is we have video under red light. We have convincing still pictures, and a great deal of other information. I'll be happy to shoot you the links, Sasha, so that you can put that up and also take a look at yourselves. But Janet, you were talking about the table tipping and as a part of physical mediumship, and then what we call materialization or cabinet seance as the second piece of physical mediumship. The reason that the table tipping is still being done today by at least one physical medium is because he believes, and this is again Kai Muki, believes that the best way to initiate, especially somebody that's new to physical mediumship, and about half the sitters are typically new in any one seance, is to bring them in and do something like table tipping. Because what happens in the table tipping seance, not only is it phenomenal, you have spirit communication, but you start to ask questions like, well, how is this table moving? What's causing this table to move? It wasn't your little pinky on top of the table, Janet, was it?
Right.
So what's going on here? What's the mechanism, the force field? Is ectoplasm involved here? Is some type of invisible component involved here? And not only is it a lot of fun, and to make the communications, even if it's basic communications, available to potential sitters, it's a great lead-in to a cabinet seance, which is a more complicated and more complex environment. But I've done the table tipping stuff, and I've just find it really fun. I've had some that were exceedingly phenomenal, and I've had one where I was at that I did not necessarily want wasn't crazy about staying there. We had a table of probably 150 pounds or so, really old, antique, round table. And there must have been 6, 7, 8 of us sitting there. And for whatever reason, Spirit decided they wanted to turn it upside down, spin it on the ceiling. And
God.
Yeah, when you got that hanging over your head, you're thinking about a lot more things than just, gee, this is neat. So,
woo!
Out of here.
Yeah, there's a lot of
How did they get down? Did they drop it or did they lower it down?
Flipped it over and turned it and laid it back down.
Oh, they laid it back down upside down.
One thing I want to know is my colleague Chris Hardy says that she can tell the difference of the size of coherent fields, and I just wonder if it makes a difference whether there's 8 people or 80 people there in terms of what you get.
No doubt about it. I'll tell you what really makes the difference, and this again was a discussion that I just finished having, so it's fresh on my mind. I've actually been to a physical mediumship seance where I've walked in the room and sat down with people, especially a lot of people that I don't know, and you can just feel the cynicism, and I don't want to say criticism because there's nothing wrong with being critical, but just the cynical approach that, oh God, what am I doing here? This is going to be, I guess we get to figure out how the medium does all these things with his hands tied behind his back and his mouth stuffed with a tennis ball and his legs bound to the chair. It's that kind of thing. And Sasha, it's the negative energy that that really is the downturner. Now, if you have a lot of positive energy people who are looking forward to this, who are willing to come in with a critical mind but an open mind, then that energy turns into just more phenomena, usually a longer physical mediumship seance. They typically last 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I've had some go 5.
Wow.
But you can almost palpate the difference. I'm sure everybody's walked into a room that's on this conversation and walked in there and go, oh, this is not a great place. The bad vibes all over this place. Or walked into a room full of happy people and say, God, this is really upbeat. This is great to be here. It's the same thing. It's just human beings bringing to the experience their own belief systems and prejudices and biases and lack of biases. So it makes more difference, I think, how much negative energy is in the room. But certainly if you have a positively generated energetic seance condition, there's no doubt about it that the more the merrier. And the limitation is really more to the number of people that you can put into a darkened room than it is with the number of people that can sit and watch a physical mediumship seance.
Wow. Can you request... I really like to talk to Fidel Castro. That might be a curse word in Florida, but I can you request a powerful spirit like Einstein or Fidel?
You can approach a physical mediumship seance with an intention or a desire to have a conversation with a particular spirit, and that has actually happened. That has happened to me. And I'll relate the instance to you here in a second. But it's really not. It's not a call up or dial up kind of situation. And the reason for this is the spirits who come through, they have an art that they have to learn on their side of the veil. They're having to deal with an ectoplasmic-like structure that they physically speak into in order for that vibration to be carried into the seance room and come through in whatever intelligible form it's supposed to be, whether it's sounds or it's a human voice or whatever it happens to be. Learning how to do that takes time. So they're having to learn on their side how to do these things, including the manipulation of objects in the seance room.
You talk to them about how they do it from their end. So you guys have asked them questions how do you communicate? And so they're saying that they are using a device of some kind.
Yeah, they're basically saying, Janet, there's a technology involved here. Now, this may be a spiritual technology that you and I really don't understand much about, but it still fits the term of technology. And let me give you a perfect example of how this works. My wife and I went to a seance. Warren Kaler was the physical medium. My wife gets called to the front of the cabinet out of the sitting circle, makes her way there, sits down in a chair. And typically in any physical mediumship seance, in order to create energy and enjoyment and happiness and fun, and up the vibration, as it's called, there's a boom box or some kind of music that's involved. And there's always a lot of singing along together. You know, it's just like campfire stuff. You know what I mean? It's just having fun and up in the vibration, enjoying each other. And this creates higher energy potentials. And so my wife was sitting there, and the circle leader put on the CD that he would use just to create some music for the environment, because he was told to do so. And the song Imagine came on. And you could hear in the very slightest voice, almost like a loud whisper, a spirit coming through singing the tune. It was John Lennon in his voice.
Wow.
But Lennon, because he hasn't been on the other side that long, and or because he hasn't practiced this a whole lot, he wasn't very robust at all. I mean, when you have a conversation with Winston Churchill, that conversation is right in your face. He's very robust. But he shows up in almost every major physical mediumship demonstration. It's something he apparently enjoys doing. He almost always sounds exactly the same, like Winston Churchill. But
you know, coming back to a technology, this box that this fellow had, it almost sounds like that was dovetailing with the technology that the people on the other side have. There's things in electricity like there's whole gigantic field in France at Carnac, which is supposed to be full of these transformers. And somehow the box that fellow had on his shoulder seems like it was part. What was the mystery? What was in the box?
Yeah, let me finish this sequence, but then the box. Okay, go ahead.
What did you want me to finish, Janet?
You were in the mid sentence, and I was, but then address his question. So you were saying something, and I'm sorry, I lost track of what it was. I did. Remember
too.
what?
We'll get back.
Don't worry.
Well, I was talking about John Lennon and coming through during the Imagine sequence and whatnot, and that the volume of the clarity of the spirit coming through is very much inherently tied to his ability to practice his art on the veil side or enforce his technology. Now, to get back to Sasha's question, I was talking about Leslie Flint, physical medium, who had an ectoplasmic voice box. It was created on his shoulder. It would come out of his neck, and you could actually look at. There are a few, and I'll send it to you, Sasha. There's several photographs on the internet about this, but what you'll see is what looks like an open mouth and a set of larynx and other items that you use to create the human voice, sitting as an ectoplasmic form on his shoulder. And I don't discount one bit what you're saying about the tie-in between the technology on the spirit side and the technology, which I consider ectoplasm is a technology. That the technology on our side is linked through the same type of apparatus. It would just make sense that was the case. Now, they may have an etheric ectoplasm. They may have an etheric type of technology that doesn't even begin to resemble the ectoplasm of the physical medium, but the ability to communicate between those two technologies obviously is there. So, I think that's what's happening. We've never gotten any confirmation on that, to my knowledge, though.
Thank you. I understand.
So Churchill comes through. So when you've been to these sessions, who came through? Who comes through all the time? Is it Churchill? Anybody else? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. We have special guests from time to time. The captain of the Titanic came through and told us about the horrors of that and how he had been misrepresented in what happened. And we have a piece of that. We get the occasional musician. We get a lot of American Indians, historical American red Indians. I say red because it's always a red Indian who physically manifests inside the seance room. But for instance, Yellowfeather is the spirit control for physical medium Warren Kaler. And Yellowfeather is there at every one of his physical mediumship demonstrations to act as the MC, the spirit control, and the like. So we have extraterrestrial beings that come through, both materialized as well as in voice. We have all kinds of repeat individuals that you will pick up as you go from physical medium to physical medium. And one of the reasons that the celebrities come through is not just because it's fun to hear from Winston Churchill. And I'll tell you a Winston Churchill story that I think you'll find fun. But it's not just that, but it gives us a way to say, okay, here we have a recording of Winston Churchill in seance. And here is Winston Churchill, delivering, an address on BBC back in the World War II era. And you can do the testing of those things, both the scientific and audiometric testing of it, but you can just listen and see the similarities between the two is phenomenal. And it helps you to be able to link back and say, well, this really is a spirit. It really is a discarnate. This is someone who had a life as Winston Churchill. Now, my Churchill story is kind of a funny one. I was sitting in a seance, and Churchill came through. And he says, he calls me by first name, and he says, Walter, I want you to get with these two other individuals in the seance room, and I want you to write a book for me. And I said, well, Winston, I'm not a book writer, and I'm not an authority on, your history for that matter. He says, no, I'm going to dictate the book to you. I'm going to transcribe you, the three of you, the book. And one of them was going to write in Spanish, and the other two of us were going to take down this book and the like. And I said, okay, that's great. That's great. When do we do this? He said, well, we'll talk more about it. And he dissipated, and another spirit came through, and the seance went on. Well, the next day, I was going back into the seance room again, and I needed to go out to my car to get another pair of socks or something on. Seance rooms are typically cold. Not only do we get cold drafts in there, but they're typically set at cold environments. Spirit likes air conditioning and prefers 65-degree weather. So I went out to get another pair of socks because I'm thin-skinned. I was going to freeze, and I was in my car, and I heard this voice like it was in my head, said, you need to get back. And I said, oh, okay. So I got out of my car, and I was thinking, what the heck was that? And I got out of my car, and I went to the back toward the seance room, and I kept thinking, well, I ought to go to the bathroom. I don't want to go to the bathroom. Well, I'm just going to go in the bathroom. So I decided I'd just go into the bathroom, even though I've been told to get back, and the seance was ready to start. And I said, I'm going to the bathroom. So I go in the bathroom, and the physical medium, Warren Kaler, happens to be in there. And we know each other, and we're laughing and talking about extraterrestrials. And we were laughing about that, and, some that were coming through in his seance and the like. And so we go in and we sit down, the seance starts. Boom, here comes Churchill. And he comes right up to me. And he says, I heard what you and Warren were talking about in the bathroom out there. And, of course, my first thought was, is there no privacy anywhere? And I said, yeah, what about that? He says, well, you and I, Walter, are going to have a long conversation about extraterrestrials one day. And I said, well, Winston, why I got you here? This book that you want to transcribe, I'm a little concerned about it, but how long is it? He says, 671 pages. I'm thinking, well, that's going to take 80 hours to do.
Right.
And there's no way this physical medium is going to sit here for 80 hours, 2 hours at a time to get this book out. And I just started laughing. And he said, I even have a name for it. It was something, the Prime Minister's View from the Other Side of the Veil, I think was his name. Of course, this book has never been written. And the reason I think that is because one of the things that you have to understand about spirit, they have no idea what time's about. They understand events.
Right.
They probably had some idea that they lived and died and there was time involved in that. But over there's no time. So for him to say, well, I'm just going to put out a 671-page book and I'm going to transcribe through direct voice to you, that probably made great sense. To us, it made no sense at all. So that was kind of our Churchill moment, so to speak.
Interesting. Oh, and we're coming up at the top of the hour in 3 minutes, but I have a quick question. So you said ETs are coming through and they're manifesting. Are they solid? Are they translucent? What type of ETs are manifesting?
Yes, they are solid. These beings are the least often manifested. I have to say this. But again, Sasha, I'll send you the links so that you can see it. But Ta,
thank you.
Ta is a extraterrestrial being. Claims he is an extraterrestrial being, and when he comes through, he comes cloaked in an ectoplasmic layer. It's almost like a big bathrobe, you know. And this protects him in his spirit form from the light and from physical reality and the issues that we have here. This lower density, lower vibration environment that we're in, it protects him, and he is can be clearly seen though, with being almond-eyed, no eyelashes, no eyebrows, the typical extended gray, you might say, look, and so we're getting some physical manifestations of those types of beings, but typically the manifestations are of incarnates that are coming back for reasons of that their lives were involved in some way, shape, or form in alchemy, in physical mediumship, in spiritual matters, and they have learned how to manifest themselves in such a way where you can hear them walk the floor. They will come and touch you on the head. You can touch them and portions of them if they allow you to do so. So all of the tactile senses are involved in the manifestations, whether they be extraterrestrial beings or they be spirit discarnate beings.
Are they warm? Are they cool? What's your temperature when you touch them?
They all of them have the same feeling of warmth that you would expect from a human touch. They often feel physically a lot larger. William is the spirit control for David Thompson, physical medium. William runs the show. And I've had him walk over and put his hand on my head and his toes on my toes to show that he's got boots on. I've heard him walk the floor, and I've had him, when he's do that, to ask me, do you feel my hand? And he'd pat my head and rub my hair and whatnot. And the only difference between that and the physical touch is his hand felt bigger. You know, William was a pretty big guy anyway, but I'm talking about substantially bigger, almost like you had a winter glove on. But the fingers manipulated, the thumbs manipulated, and we'll get the rest of it.
Yeah. We'll be back in 5 minutes after this break. See you in 5. Lots of feedback. Okay, stopped. And you're listening to Revolution Radio, Studio B. Our producer is Thomas Becker. also known as a Mad Painter. Our guest is Walter Rucker. But before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to the website, revolution.radio, and go to the link at the top left-hand side and make your donation. And if you want to make an ongoing donation, go to the Patreon button, and you can set up a recurring donation. And we really want to thank you for your donation, because we really appreciate that, and you help us keep the lights on and pay the bills and bring you all these wonderful shows like ours. Sasha, you're back. What would you like to say?
I'm just finding this utterly fascinating. For me, it's like about all I can do to channel Sasha.
So what about people like Jane Roberts, who came through, or who was Shelley's stuff, and then what was it, Ramtha?
Ramtha, yeah.
Are they the same thing? Are they different? What's the difference?
They're a different sort of physical mediumship. They are non-seance physical mediums. J.Z. Knight, who channels Ramtha, and that's why she calls it a channeling as opposed to a physical mediumship, because it's more of a channeling. It's more of direct voice. But the lines get really blurred between what the J.Z. Knights are of the world and what the Bashars are doing and physical mediumship. They cross over each other. But typical historical physical mediumship is darkened room, seance, cabinetry for the medium, trance, sitters in one room for a particular period of time. There haven't been many physical mediums that have been doing what we would call platform mediumship, where they get up in front of a public group, and perform physical mediumship. It's done, but it's more rare than not. So I think that the differences are subtle, but have mostly to do with, is there a phenomenon other than the voice coming through? Is there, in the channeling, is there a phenomenon other than that happening? And that's one of the definitions of physical mediumship, is there's always seance room phenomenon happening that encourages the participation of the group in the overall physical mediumship experience. I'll tell you something that we're doing, and Sasha, I think that you'll pay particular interest in this. Grant Cameron and I have come up with an idea, and it originally started as Grant's idea. I'm the facilitator of the idea. Mm-hmm. And that is, we looked at J.Z. Knight. When J.Z. Knight channeled Ramtha, when she went into trance, channeled Ramtha, she produced a set of DNA test results before trance, during trance, and published those. Mm-hmm. The published version of the DNA tests, 3 different labs, shows that when she was J.Z. Knight, her markers were all female markers. Genetically, she could be perceived as a female, identified as that. When she channeled Ramtha, her genetic markers changed. Her DNA actually changed. But what we are going to do is we're going to replicate that experiment. And we're going to do it with at least 2 physical mediums that have agreed to do this, and a couple of trance mediums also as well. I think we're going to probably try to find 4 or 5 mediums who use trance in order to bring through whatever their particular gift is, whether it just be an individual like Ramtha, or it could be a physical mediumship seance where multiple spirit entities come through. And we're
it would be fascinating if you could put a network of electrical recorders throughout the brain, and we could tell exactly whether things came from motor area 4 or from the cerebral cortex on the left or the right side or the occiput, and so that this is a very exciting idea that you're putting forth about parts of the brain being involved in different kinds of phenomena.
Well, I think that's an excellent idea. It's been done once that I know of. Bashar, Darryl Anka, before he goes into trance and Bashar comes through, did the EEG output and showed that it was like night and day, the places that his brain was physically stimulated. The problem that we have with physical mediumship is we're in a darkened environment. And we can get somebody before they, before trance, before they go into the seance room and begin to demonstrate physical mediumship. It's very difficult to do that once they're in trance because we're in a darkened environment. But I'm seeing more and more of that idea starting to come around. But you're exactly right. Where we saw with JZ Knight, assuming now that her protocols were in order and that she produced results, but she never really gave us the exact way that she went about getting those results and how they were analyzed and how they were put forward.
A little tube? Did she spit in a little tube and send it off to a lab, or how did she get her samples?
Yeah, there'd be different amount of oxytocin and testosterone.
Well, this is true, and I think she did cheek swabs, inner cheek swabs. Is the way that she did it.
Cheek swab. Well, the one I did, you had to actually get a whole vial full of spit, so it took a while.
Yes, it wouldn't matter whether you could see or not if you're just recording electrical impulses that were crossing the brain. You could have a map of that directly.
There be a recording of the brain, so when you turn the lights on, you could actually just look at the printout.
It doesn't even matter whether there's a light. You just do it in another room. It's all like you could do it electronically.
You could have the equipment, the wires coming to another room, so the person that's operating it could see what's coming out. And
it can be wireless. There's no reason even to have to have a wire.
Yeah, that's.
Well,
you just put loci.
Yeah. I wasn't even aware that you could do this on a wireless basis, and that's an awfully good idea because there's nothing that would prevent us from having a miniature seance, for instance, where we could put a physical medium into a trance condition, or any trance medium into a trance condition, and just for the purpose of doing the testing, because that in effect what happened with Darryl Anka when he brought Bashar through when he was EEG wired. He just did a mini trance session and started out as himself. They took the readings. Bashar came through. They took the readings, and they found that they were entirely different. Completely motor activity was entirely different on both of the readings in there. No, that's where I stop because that's where my science background ends. I'm not certain what all that ultimately has to say about physical mediumship. It's just like DNA testing. It is curious and it is evidential that somebody in trance has one set of DNA and out of trance has a different DNA structure. It says those things exist. It doesn't necessarily prove the mediumship, but it does say that DNA can be changed under certain states of altered consciousness. I think is the easiest way to say that.
This is so similar to the stories in the Bible of what Jesus did with his mind in bringing in life-death situations with birds and another boy. And it's what you're saying sounds like he was in a way somehow bringing forth a higher power. Really, it sounds like the same thing to me.
It is. I think it is. And whether you call it higher power or higher self or higher mind or whatever you want to call it, it's just another aspect of consciousness. And whatever you want to call it really doesn't make any difference. Again, like we said at the beginning of the show, it's the message that comes through. I'm going to tell you something interesting about the Jesus story. I was raised Roman Catholic, and which that means I never saw a Bible until I was in college. That's what that meant. But I did get a lot of, I got a lot of information about the crucifixion and resurrection. And I had a scholar, and I can't remember exactly who it was, but he wrote a paper, and he said, if you look at the New Testament, and especially at the resurrection and transfiguration of Christ, it sounds a heck of a lot like a materialized physical mediumship being. that
Yes.
Uh-huh.
that Christ was transfigured into this glowing white being, or whatever the interpretation of those scriptures happen to be. And as you know, there's how many New Testament Bibles? 50, and there's 50 different variations on what that is. But the bottom line is that they all have kind of the same thing. He died. He was later seen by the apostles. He was a physically manifested being. Thomas put his hands into the wounds and scars. Whether that's mythology or true or not doesn't make any difference. It's the point that this is a physical being. And then when he transfigured and resurrected, he was completely glowing, and up into the sky he went. And except for the going up in the sky part, that is a pretty fairly decent description of a manifestation in a physical mediumship seance.
I have a question. I have two questions. Is Grant Cameron coming down to your group? Is he flying down to Florida to participate with your group?
Yes, he is. He is going to be with us in Fort Lauderdale in June. We may also have an opportunity in October, again, my neck of the woods, Sarasota, Florida, just south of Tampa. For a different physical medium. That'd be David Thompson there. It will be Kai Mugi in Fort Lauderdale in June. And he's very excited about this. Grant and I have kind of struck up a nice relationship over the last few months based around this. I've done some interviews with him about physical mediumship, and we do other things too, OBE and consciousness and the like. But he's shown a great interest in it, and he's got a really strange place in ufology. He's almost not in ufology anymore. He basically has somewhat transitioned from nuts and bolts ufology to those things which are consciousness based, and that's what gets him into things such as extraterrestrial communications, spirit communications, and I introduced him to physical mediumship when a friend of mine wrote him a letter and said, "You're talking to the wrong people about this. This is who you need to be talking to." And he didn't even know what, like you guys, he didn't have any background in it at all. It's a very, very segregated portion of spiritual interaction, physical mediumship is. By its very nature, you have 20, 30, 40 sitters at a time. There's only so many mediums. There's only going to be so many seances. There are only going to be so many places that those seances are going to happen. I'll tell you what I would like to do, though, if you guys are interested. We can talk about this offline. But I have good enough relationships with several of the physical mediums that we might be able to convince one of them to come to Hawaii and sit with a group of people with you guys. They're always
great.
Yeah.
They're always looking for places to expand their presence and their message and to expand their art. I don't know of anybody, as you said, Janet, I don't know of anybody in Hawaii, or in the Hawaiian Islands, I should say, that's doing this. But because they're in the United States, and we've already got these guys coming into the United States, with proper credentialing and whatnot, making it over to Hawaii is a simple matter of a little bit longer airplane flight and some other considerations. We'll talk about the details of that, but that's something that could be fun to work on.
Well, that sounds great. Because that's how I started. When I came to Hawaii in 1993, I was involved with all these physical mediums. And Arthur, did you know Arthur Pacheco? He's got a few YouTubes out there. He was the one that did Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Wonderful man. He moved, I think, to Arizona. Then he died. He died on the mainland. Just suddenly, he was pretty young and relatively healthy, but suddenly he was gone. And then there was another fellow that was moving to the mainland to a church, and I think it was in the Arizona area. And he said that they did the trumpets, and I said, "Oh, it's fascinating." So apparently the trumpets would fly around the room, and then they would come to somebody, and like a ring would fall into somebody's hand. Right? They'd put their hand out, and something would fall in, and so they were taking these artifacts. And some of them were ancient, like from Egypt and stuff, and they were worth lots of money. Some of them were nothing, but the people would go and get them analyzed somewhere, and they go, yeah, this is from, Mesopotamia, circa whatever. And it was like, so I always wanted to go there, but I lost touch with him. So this would be coming full circle for me, because I started out as a young child always seeing ghosts. And that's why, and my house was haunted. It appeared to be like a portal. And that's why as kids, we would sit down and do these seances. And we had a limited amount of success. But, when I was a kid, I would just be sitting in the middle of the day in my living room watching H.R. Puffin stuff, right? Some kind of cartoon. And this disembodied head would be hovering behind me. And, I saw him, my sister saw him, I would chase it after a while. First I was terrified, but then after a while I'd get angry at it. I go, leave me alone. I'm just trying to be a kid here. Leave me alone. So I would love to. I'd love to. We'll talk about that off air. Okay. I'm certain there's a way to do this. And it would be nice to go over to the Aquarian Foundation
on
Oahu, and maybe they can do an event there. And so I do have a connection there. So it would be 2 islands, Maui and Oahu.
Well, that'd be great. That would be a perfect connection. And I can tell you, I can think of at least one of the physical mediums who is a Keith Milton Reinhardt admirer that might find that to be really appealing, to be able to be in the same society and maybe even in the same energy as the Aquarian people are.
Right, and I haven't seen them in over 20 years, so I have no idea what's going on with them now. But the other question I had is, what do the dead want us to know? Why are they coming through this Arthur? I mean, this who was coming through?
Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, were they coming home with a specific message? Was it for humanity in general? Was it for individual people?
Yes.
Yes, all the above. So tell us some of the messages they had for, like, humanity. What are they? Are they trying to warn us about the coronavirus? Or, I mean, what kind of things are they saying?
Not much of that. Let me go back and be a little bit more general with you. Each spirit has its own particular agenda. So it's up to the message that they want to deliver, and in a way what they feel that we need to receive in terms of messages. They tend to want to stick to subjects that involve the proof of the continuity of consciousness. In other words, life after death is another way of saying it. But as the years have gone by, their messages have become more and more sophisticated. And this is why I think we're starting to see extraterrestrials involved in physical mediumship experience, because the message is evolving as we have evolved. If you go back and Janet, excuse me, you were talking about when you were a little girl, you had these disembodied spirits as an experience. Mm-hmm. Physical mediumship actually started with 3 little girls in upper New York. They were called the Fox Sisters, and the long and short is that they were hearing rappings and they were hearing loud noises. When I say rappings and noises, I'm talking about types of things that their neighbors heard 50 and 100 meters away. And they were all under the age of 13 years of age. I mean, 13, 10, and 8 or something, the 3 Fox sisters. And they couldn't figure out where this was coming from. And they finally figured out that, like in table tipping, you can ask a question and get an answer, depending on how many times the table tips yes or no. Well, they started having communication with these knocks and raps, and they talk out loud and say, well, tell me something, or tell me this, or tell me that. And they get a yes and no answers, 1 rap or 2 raps. And from that, physical mediumship exploded. It's an American phenomenon that has just moved across the ocean on us.
What year was that? Do you have an approximation?
1850-ish.
Okay, 1850s, yeah.
But that's actually the start of it. And that now, at that point, getting back to your question, Sasha, that point, think about now, 1850, okay? There's no mediumship of any kind really going on. Newspapers were just starting to be the rage, mostly regional. The information that that particular spirit, which was, by the way, a beggar who had come by and was killed by a former tenant in their home, buried under their house, and he decided that he wanted to make himself known, and he was one creating the knocks and the raps and whatnot. And all he was trying to say to those little girls and their open minds was, there's life after death. Mm-hmm. And so the message has always been one of consciousness, continuity, afterlife, eternal living, no death, that type of thing. Now, as we have moved along and gone through areas and times where physical mediumship was much more phenomenal than it is today, 20s, 30s, and 40s and the like, much more phenomenal, to where we are now, where we're getting extraterrestrial messages and other types of information. It's been an evolution of what their message is. So it started from something as basic as 1, 2, 3, and now we're in the 8, 9s, and 10s. So as far as mankind, is concerned, they don't necessarily come through and say things like, "Oh, your world's going to blow up, and if you don't get off on this path," or we see in the future that there's going to be a great event of consciousness manifestation. Some of them do that. Some of them will pass along communication like that. But there still is more or less the emphasis on, hey, I'm in spirit, you're not. I'm just as alive as you are. And my message is important, but ultimately you wouldn't be listening to me if you didn't believe the fact that there was life after death. So it has become an evolution of the message that has brought us to where we are today.
It's interesting. In the Old Testament, they say that the Levites who were taking care of the Ark of the Covenant would go into a trance and they could ask Yahweh a yes or no question. And it sounds so much like what you're just describing with these three teenagers.
Doesn't it
sounds like it really sounds like this very similar.
Even
I was aware of that. Go ahead.
Even if it wasn't physical mediumship as such, it's still the same communication pattern. It's still the same reasons for contact. It's still the same consciousness connection that we're having. So, Sasha, I agree with you.
I was in a place in a dorm situation. In the room beside me, a girl had just died. And so I was kind of like, I was aware that's where she died. So I went into my room to go to sleep. And as I started to get undressed and get into my pajamas, I heard the very strong knock on the wall. And I went, oh, she doesn't know she's dead. So I started the yes, no. I just did it out of instinct. I go, this person wants to communicate they're dead. So I said, do you know you're dead? And so we started yes, no. And I told her, your family's coming tomorrow. There's going to be a big service for you. And so then before I said, you have to stop knocking on my wall now because I have to go to sleep. And this is kind of freaking me out. So could you stop? She agreed. So that works. And I didn't know that's how it started. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it really did. And again, I guess it points out that here we have a spirit in the 1850s who somehow figured out how to enhance these little Fox Girl Sisters environments so that they could physically manifest the sounds and the knocks and raps that they were trying to produce. And now here we are in 2020, and we're still seeing the same kinds of things happening. Yours is a past event, but these events are still happening today. You'll see them all over the internet. People will be talking about having basic communication. We still have table turning and table tipping seances. with spirit even today.
Even today. So the people that are using those, the technology to communicate with the dead, and they're doing all these recordings on on YouTube and stuff. What are they? Do you guys try that? What do they call that?
Well, I want to know who's going to win the fifth at Belmont.
Well, let me tell you, if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. I mean, you got to keep the odds up, you know?
Now, you had some personal experiences where you were out of body, and I was reading, I think it was one of your articles about you were addressing ET or something. You were involved with ET. What's your personal involvement with? Are you a contactee experiencer?
Yeah, I am, and you know, it's funny. I never really considered myself that. Somebody else picked up on this article that I had written that you're talking about, and I'll explain it for the listeners here in a second. But picked up on that and said, you know, this is a CE5 experience. You know, this is an experience where you have direct physical contact with an alien. And I kind of said, I don't know. Maybe it is. I mean, maybe it meets the definition, but I'll tell you the story. You can make your own judgment.
Okay.
I was a baseball player. I was in my teens. And I went to sleep one night, and I found myself getting up out of bed, which wasn't unusual because, you know, it's time to go to baseball practice, and I'm going to go pick up a friend of mine. And all of a sudden, I find myself in the car, and the car is driving itself. It's driving itself down this road that I go all the time. Very familiar territory for me, a mile away from my house. And we come to this set of power lines. You know, the big, heavy lattice work power lines that rise, you know, multiple stories in the air, and they take up 100 yards wide, and you know, these massive easements. And I get down to get out. The car stops. I get out of the car. I don't remember how. Climb this little embankment and look down there, and I see what is a craft. Now, through the whole time I'm driving down to this point, it's so foggy I can't even hardly see anything. Now, somehow, when I get out of the car and go to, you know, the fence, and I have no idea why I'm doing this, it all seemed very natural at the time. But I'm looking down this easement, 50 meters or so, and I see a typical saucer-shaped craft, you know, two inverted saucer discs, plates on top of each other, grayish. It's got four little pods sticking out from it, which is landing gear and whatnot. And I'm just watching this thing, and I'm not particularly impressed or anything. And then there are three beings, and two of them are already outside the craft. And the third one comes down what must have been some kind of ramp. And the two who were doing all this kind of busy work turn around and look at me. And I'm telling you, I can remember to this day that stare and those different shaped eyes and the different shaped heads. And even though they were 50 meters away, it was like I was standing, you know, within feet of them. And the stare was saying to me, what are you doing here? Why are you looking at us? What's the problem? You know? And I can remember thinking, I don't know. I don't really know any of that. And as soon as that happened, I find myself waking up again. I'm back in my room. I'm getting out of bed. I'm wet. And I'm going, why am I wet? And I get into the same car, but this time I'm driving, go the same route, go to pick up my friend to go to baseball practice. And he says to me, it's been pouring all night long. We're not going to have practice. I said, what do you mean it's been pouring all night long? He said, it has poured all night long. We're not going to have practice. What are you doing here? And I told him, I have no idea. So I go back and I sit down and I'm thinking to myself, was this an out-of-body experience? Now, I wasn't thinking of this back then. I can tell you. This was 67, 68. I wasn't thinking about OBEs or ETs or anything back then. But I can remember when this came back into my memory, was this an out-of-body experience that I had? Or was this an extraterrestrial encounter? Or is it both? Or are they separate? Or are they one and the same? And I'm writing a series of articles called about OBEs, and several that I've had, where the lines are completely blurred between the extraterrestrial experience and the out-of-body experience. And I see a number of other people having the same confusion. Probably not the right.
You know, the hypothesis that my mind creates when there's a number of alternative hypotheses, that they're all contributory and part of this same phenomenon.
I think it's exactly what's going on. I think it's one of the reasons that we can't ferret out the differences between these when we really start to look at them. Because when I talk to extraterrestrial experiencers, and I asked them, I said, well, were you out of body at the time? Many times they'll say, well, yeah, I was. That's the way it felt like. I said, well, did you have an ET experience or an out-of-body experience, or both? Did you have to go out of body to have the ET experience? And I think in some cases you actually have to. In my case, I think that is the case. And my other
wet. You were physically wet, so you thought you were physically there.
Yeah, it just nothing made any sense.
Yeah.
You know, and back then when it happened, it was like I had this memory of driving down this road and looking and seeing this thing. I had that very clear in my mind, but yet it never felt like I physically did it. There wasn't any, because the very next morning or whenever I got back in the body and popped back out again into physical reality and then went off to practice and pick up my friend, it felt entirely different. But it was the same route, the same place, and completely different meteorological conditions. So the point of it is that
if you went back there, if you were to be back in that car, and even imagine yourself in the car now, and in your mind's eye, look at the speedometer, at the odometer, what do you see?
I see nothing. But
okay.
When I went down there in my out-of-body extraterrestrial experience, when I had that experience, there was nothing about it that felt physical except for the trees around me, the surroundings around me, even the car I was in, which was a very distinguishable car for the time period, red and a sports car. It didn't feel like that. It felt more like I was just sitting in a chair with a view out the window, but I wasn't driving, and I didn't have any gauges, and certainly the record player wasn't, the radio wasn't playing. None of it felt at the time as if it was anything like physical reality. But it also was not alarming. It seemed very, it seemed as if it was meant to happen, I guess is the best way to say it.
Wow.
This memory,
I've had some experiences. Okay, go ahead. Finish your thing, and then I wanted to add to that. Go ahead.
This memory didn't come back to me entirely until maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and then it comes back in pieces. And it didn't really come back until I started to write about it, which is one of the reasons I write my articles.
That's what's very important. When you start writing, it just starts pouring in, or at least when I start writing. But I've had some which it is confusing. Are you there physically? But I've had some where I realize I'm actually here, and it's almost like you pop in and you realize you're there, and you can feel the wind going across your skin, and you can hear. It's like everything's enhanced, and it's almost shocking. You go, oh, I'm really here.
Yes. Yes.
How did I get here? And they have a weird sense of humor. They'll put you, like one time they put me in the middle of the park, which was about a mile away from my house, and I knew it was dangerous for a little girl to be in the park after dark. And all of a sudden I'm in the park, and I go, oh my God, I'm here, and it's the middle of the night. Why am I here? Mm-hmm. And as soon as I realized that, the next thing I know, I'm inside my house and I'm at my door, and I'm fiddling with the
outside.
No, they transport me back to my house. I'm inside my house.
Oh, inside, and
I'm closed. I don't know. It's like the door is closed, but I'm facing the door. And my mother appears at the top of the stairs. Her bedroom's upstairs. She goes, Janet, what are you doing? Are you trying to leave the house? And I said, no, Mom. And I was like shocked and embarrassed. And I said, I don't know. I'm coming to bed. So they do have a weird sense of humor, but they listen to me when I realize that I don't want to be here and I don't feel safe. They put me back in my house. So maybe they have some kind of teleportation. I don't have any. There was no time between the thought and being back in my house, but I know I was physically out there because I knew the park. I knew the sounds of the park, the stream, the air, and it was just the awareness. I'm here, and that's happened a half dozen times. But I think what I get from my interviews with experiencers is most of the time they don't take us physically because space is very harmful to the human body. So they limit our exposure to these conditions because they really value our health. They don't want to damage us or hurt us in any way. So a lot of times they'll just take us astrally. But sometimes they need to take us physically if they're doing some kind of repair in the body.
And Whitley says he was injured.
Some people get injured. We've had a couple deaths, like, who was that?
Elizabeth Ang and a boy used to get transported together, and suddenly this kid died, and it was explained to her they made a mistake. The technician didn't do the thing right, the implant right, and then they have accidents sometimes, and they were sorry. But the whole town got around Elizabeth and protected her in case the ETs came back. There was these kids that they would take regularly.
Anyway, we've heard all the stories you can imagine.
That's really interesting, Linda. Yeah, well, this confusion between states of consciousness, especially when you're talking about the extraterrestrial interaction, human and ET interaction, I just don't think we have a whole lot of clue about all of what's going on there. I've had out-of-body experiences that, much like yours, Janet, that I could swear to you I was awake in this physical reality, and then come to find out I wasn't. And I think you used the word shock. The shock of that is considerable. When you when I teach the out-of-body experience, I have a particular technique or so, but I'll make this short. To self-create or self-initiate an out-of-body experience, the way that I do it is I relax, get myself into an altered state, not trance, but just a relaxed, altered state, and I get a vortex, a black and white vortex that kind of spins around in the middle of my head that I can see with my eyes shut. And once that starts, the vibrations then start. And when the vibrations start, I know I'm popping out. And when I say vibrations, I'm talking about locomotive type vibrations. So bad that if I miss popping out, I'll have a tremor for the remainder of the day. Well, in one of these kinds of sessions that I had, I thought I had missed my OBE vortex point and had not popped out. And I got up from the bed, or I think I was laying in the bed or whatever. I got up and decided I'm going to go outside, and I saw a guy's, putting his pickup truck with the ladder, and I thought, wow, that's funny. I don't remember needing anything fixed. Went and laid down the grass, and all of a sudden a couple people come on, Siamese twin types, and they want to talk to me, and they're saying things like, April, may I be it April? And I'm going, this is really, really weird. And why am I laying in the grass? My front yard doesn't have any grass in it. And then all of a sudden, boom, you realize you are out of body. And you never knew it. You absolutely had no clue that I had popped out. But somewhere between the sensation, the vibrations stopping, I assumed that I had actually popped out of the body. So I've done that a couple of times, and you're absolutely right. That can be a little bit alarming. But, I don't know how you guys put up with it. There are many experiencers out there that have histories, especially as young kids, of having discarnate embodiments come by, have contact with other beings. You know, I started this stuff when I was in my 50s, and I just have no idea. And you have my constant admiration for having to be able to put up with the shocks and the relevancies of having those kinds of experiences.
Well,
It's
at
such a young age.
My life. I wish I had control, because it seems like I have no control whatsoever. And it's been happening since I was young, so young. It was back in the 50s. There was nobody talking about this, and I just had to keep it to myself. I couldn't tell my brother or sister, or mother or father, like I'm going out of my body. And in fact, one time I caught myself with the vibes like you're talking about, and I thought I was dying, and I stopped it. I said, no, you can't die. You're here to have a life. And so I'm so glad that, you know, we've had people like Robert Monroe and the Monroe Institute, and I'm that's really encouraging that you've learned how to do it, but I still don't know how to consciously do it. But I'll tell you, sometimes when I realize I'm out of body, I have this pure elation and total bliss. It's like I'm out, and then I can fly. Can you fly?
Yes.
I say, okay, now I'm really going to travel. And I will just launch myself, and I will zoom around the planet, and I have so much fun. It's pure joy.
Yeah.
Wow.
I did mine when I was younger, and it was usually I'd fly around my neighborhood, you know, and look down on it and whatnot. It was kind of fun because occasionally I didn't realize it back then. I'd look down at some of my playmates, and they'd have on certain clothes or be playing a certain game. And, you know, the next day I'd say, hey, I saw y'all playing such and such. And they said, you know, look at me like, well, you weren't there. How'd you know that? And at that time, I didn't even really relate that I was having an out-of-body flying kind of experience. Again, I was in my teens, early teens, and it just seemed like a dream. But as you know, as well as I do, there are no similarities between dreams and a real out-of-body experience. And like a lucid dream, they're very easily determinable. Which ones are which? There's no confusion between what's a dream and what's an out-of-body experience when you just sit back and analyze it a little bit. But I'll tell you one thing that I do think is the case. And you were saying that you felt out of control. Well, you know, truth is, you have to be in control to be out of control, to feel that way.
Yeah.
You have to have that feeling of being out of control. You have to be in control to have it. I think we create our physical reality, and we create our physical reality experiences. And we certainly have themes, and we have important things that we incarnated to experience here that we are going to experience, you know, regardless. We're going to, how we go about experiencing them is up to our free will, but we're going to experience those things. Why we came here, why not? And I think that even when we feel the most out of control, well, you know, it's just an experience that we need to have to be able to, in my opinion, to look back and say, hey, I really wasn't out of control. It may have felt like it, but you know what? I'm 100% responsible for the physical reality I create. I'm 100% in control of the physical reality I create. And the reason I felt out of control is that apparently need to be an experience I need to have to remind me that I'm not.
Go ahead, Scott.
Just as what you're describing about going into a trance, it's really interesting for me. What in Tantra I've learned to both be embodied and not embodied at the same time, so that I can first go into a deep state and form a coherent field with Janet and observe that and be in it in its minute particulars and in the macroscopic embodiment of our coherent field, which is both of us in whatever we connect with. So it's very similar. This is just from a different discipline, but it sounds like the same thing to me.
It sounds exactly the same. And yes, I think the only differences are the techniques and the disciplines. And isn't that really what all the differences are?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And so different people use different devices in order to get free of their dominant primary matrix and be able to not be done with it, but to just have it as an aspect and feel a bigger part of who they really are, I think.
I think you're right, too. I would agree with that.
I love talking with you. This is great. Thank you so much. Listen, while we still have time, I want you to make sure to advertise if you have something you'd like to advertise.
Oh, this is advertisement enough for me. I figured that if I've got something to say, there's going to be somebody out there that wants to hear it, and maybe more than one. And this will get to the people that resonate with it one way or the other. It's not that I'm against advertising, and it's probably something I need to. I don't even have a web page, which I'm a technology guy without a web page. I mean, the complete irony of that is absurd enough. But I've always felt that, and this is by the way my excuse, because I don't have a WordPress account or a web page. I spent the time to put this information up. That's why I write articles and send them out by a private email list. It's easy. So. But that's my excuse. That people that are going to want to hear this are going to find their way to it one way or the other. But I think there is a good argument that says that maybe there's a certain amount of that responsibility that lies on the message giver, because the real message givers, they all have advertised, they all have audiences, they all have solicited people to listen to them. And, honestly, Sasha, it's something that I do need to do. But other than that, if somebody wants to shoot a question to me about this conversation or about anything or to get on my email list, just send me an email to Walter at walterrucker.com. It's RUCKER.com. And I'll respond, stick you on my list of articles. I write a couple a week and send them out. And some of them I think are a lot of fun. I get a lot of positive feedback from it. And wouldn't have this interview with you guys today if you and Janet hadn't picked up on something that I sent out and stole your email. I don't know where I stole it from.
Yeah.
But I think I was meant to find you. I have a question about what you wrote here. You said that ETs live in a holographic-like, multidimensional, timeless environment, like much of the spirit world, and see realities from a non-linear viewpoint.
Yeah.
We live in a time-dominated four-dimensional world, which languages and experiences are laid out end-to-end. New terminology must be developed to bridge these two states of being. So could you elaborate on that, what that means, and where did you get this from, and all that good stuff?
Well, one of the first things that I like to ask people if I'm going to enter into metaphysical conversation. Now, I've researched you guys. I've known about you guys for a long time. I didn't have to ask you this, but the first question is do you or do you not create your physical reality? Does life live through you, or does life happen to you? Where do you fall on that side of the metaphysical equation? And by the response that you get, you can know what's the kind of conversation you can have. For instance, if somebody says, well, there's only one moment, the moment's now. I create my physical reality in the now, and everything is now, and all moments are now, and everything that I think is past and future is just a connection to a parallel life where it's represented as such. That's one conversation you can have, and you can go along that line. If somebody says to you, well, it's 12 o'clock, it's 1 o'clock, it's 2 o'clock, there's a past, there's a present, there's a future, they're all separate. One is really not necessarily connected with the other, and they have a time linear designation, which is what we have in our 4D physical reality, 3 of space and 1 of time. Then you have another conversation, because they're not going to understand the timelessness component of it. But what's happening is that old terminology, I call it old because it's been around with us forever, of time linearity. I see more and more is going away. I'm finding people like yourselves and others who I can have conversations with that have to do with there is no past and there is no future and there is only one moment and there is parallel reality connections. And that gives you an entirely different view on how we go about navigating physical reality if that is the opinion and belief system which you're on. So that's what I was alluding to. I'm alluding to the morphogenesis of human consciousness away from time linearity, more toward one moment, one now, one consciousness, all is one. And that's what I was talking about, having a new terminology, because we need to come up with different ways of expressing ideas that we thought of in the past. Here I am, using a time linear analogy, that we have thought of were appropriate. I just don't think as we move along that they're going to any longer be appropriate. And if you try to have this conversation with a Zeta being or a Pleiadian being or an extraterrestrial channel being, and you start to talk to them about, well, yesterday I did this and tomorrow I'm going to do this, they're just going to shut you off. They're not interested in that. They are looking for those people who have the one moment, one now concept, and to be able to express themselves in that manner, because that's an entirely different discussion. It takes you in an entirely different area. And it's two trains that will not meet. And as we evolve, both as humankind and even our spirit cohorts, as we evolve, this is going to be more and more necessary that we come up with some new ideas and new ways of communicating these conversations about no past, no future, one moment, one now. That's what I was alluding to, Jen.
You know, that's really an interesting way to be with other people in everyday reality, to not be obsessing on the past or the future, but to really make contact in the here and now, phenomenologically, to the experience that you're sharing. It makes your life alive too, not just extraordinary experiences, but everyday experiences become so wonderfully wonderful. They're just there. In all your senses.
Your presence, yeah.
Your presence
Final
is a nice
minute
way
to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Walter, we're on last minute. Final minute to you.
Oh gosh, well, I've certainly enjoyed this, and anytime I have people with your experience that I can have a conversation with, especially if it's one that gets to be public. I mean, this is a wonderful thing. It's my passion. I have a saying: if it's not fun, don't do it. This has been a great deal of fun. I literally mean that. If it's not fun, I ain't doing it anymore. I've done too many. Yeah, I've done all that stuff, and living in the moment. You know, Sasha, as you say, when you live in the moment, living right now, taking care of business right now, focusing on right now, everything is fine because there's nothing to get in your way. There's no remembrances. There's no future that you have to be concerned about. You just go with the flow.
And that is perfect timing.